So this presentation is on the Airbnb sentiment analysis, which is essentially continuing the work of the PhD Upati Vijay, in which she had a survey in which she analyzed which features of an Airbnb are most important to people when they're making the decision. So to start off, would like to talk about the project inception, really continuing Upati's work. Following that, we can talk about the data gathering, where I pulled the data from and how that worked. Next, we can talk about data analysis. Some of the tools I used were Vader and Doc2Vec. And lastly, conclusion. So I was able to achieve a 22 mean squared error, which meant essentially being between 4 to 5 points out of 100 in the rating of the Airbnb. So to start off, in terms of the project inception. So this is really the conclusion of Upati's work, which was the beginning of mine. So yeah, as you can see here, some of the features that were most important for Airbnbs, according to her analysis, were price, review rating, and cancellation policy. So essentially, we can see this based on the reviews, but as Airbnb has it, we don't get the information on each individual review in terms of how much each person rated the Airbnb. We only get the aggregate rating as a rating of the Airbnb as a whole. So I set out to really, use these reviews to maybe get a better guess of the Airbnb and conduct a sentiment analysis and use that as a feature to guess the rating. So in terms of the data that I used the Los Angeles data that I gathered from inside Airbnb. So I used the listings and reviews data sets here to pull the respective information. So essentially what I did was conduct the sentiment analysis on the reviews and then find the mean of these values based on each listing. So essentially aggregate those values by listing and then use those values as features for the regression. So in terms of the data analysis, the tools that I used were Vader, which I'll describe in a bit, as well as Doc2Vec and term frequency and inverse document frequency. So starting off with Vader. So Vader stands for Valence Aware Dictionary and Sentiment Reasoner. And this is basically a pre-built, essentially, lexicon that has data on specific words and how what their sentiment is. So it's kind of pre-built. It's a great data set, or it's a great package to use. Although, as we'll see, there are some limitations to it in terms of maybe a negative before something else, like there were no complaints being seen as a negative review. Secondly, I used Doc2Vec. So this generates vectors for pieces of text based on a continuous bag of words and script-gram model. So essentially what this is doing is kind of classifying each review in a certain sense with a certain set of vectors. So in similar reviews, we'll have similar Doc2Vec vectors, and this is very similar to Word2Vec, which does the same thing but for individual words. So the canonical example for Word2Vec is if you take queen and subtract woman and add man, then you should technically get king. So kind of applying that analysis upwards, Doc2Vec kind of does a similar thing in terms of mapping out reviews. Lastly, TF-IDF is essentially just picking out some of the most important words by seeing how much they're mentioned. So this helps see the importance of each word and really picking out some of the most important words to use as features in the analysis as well. So moving on in terms of conclusions. So I was really able to see that the features of highest importance were the Vader compound values, the Doc2Vec vectors, and some specific words. Diving into these words, actually, after conducting the random forest regression, I noticed that words related to cleanliness, refunds, and hospitality were some of the most common. So I think that this really kind of confirms Upati's findings and shows that these things are valued by people because they're mentioned in reviews. Aside from this, I think what the first two categories of features show is that the total reviews are being predicted by this analysis, and that we are getting accurate results. So, I'm really able to conclude from this that sentiment analysis works because I'm able to predict within 4 to 5 points on, a 1 to 100 scale in terms of the accuracy. So as you can also see, I kind of benchmarked the model MSE with a dummy MSE, which was a lot less accurate. And yeah, lastly, like I said before, was able to confirm Opati's findings on some of the most valuable features for an Airbnb. So that concludes my project, and thanks for watching.